First presenter for this afternoon is the principal of the Alternative Community Public High School in Ithaca, New York. He's been in and around this business since 1974, so it brings to us a great deal of experience. Some of the information he'll share with us today is on the middle school issues associated with alternative schools. One of the things that's very interesting about his program is that it's part of Ted Sizer's coalition of essential schools out of Brown University. And David just came back from Kansas City where he participated in the fall forum of essential schools. So I'd like to introduce David Lehman.
Thank you. As was pointed out, I'm going to use some overhead transparencies, and if folks sitting over here want to slip over and sit that way, and then you won't have to look through me, you can do that, but otherwise you can stay where you are. And let's just first deal with the after lunch syndrome here, okay? My daughter, who graduated from Stanford, actually have 7 kids. How many did I say? 6. Sometimes I lose track. And then we have 4 granddaughters and got some more on the way. I don't know whether granddaughters or grandsons at this point. Kim, when she was at Stanford, was working in the sleep research lab there at Stanford. And part of her work for a couple of years in the sleep research lab was looking at the question of the Siesta Syndrome, okay? And you've probably heard things like, well, you just ate a full meal, and after lunch, then, you get tired because you have a full meal and that kind of thing. Research did not show that. They went into labs where they changed the meals, they changed the times. Doesn't work, folks. You're not going to sell me on that one. They talked about a couple other factors. And what it all boiled down to was a kind of circadian rhythm in which somewhere a little later in the afternoon typically, somewhere 2:30, 4 o'clock, somewhere in the little later afternoon is where biologically our biological clocks tend to wind down a bit. Now, of course, Kim was not only learning about this while she was doing her work in the sleep research lab, but she also went to a class dealing with sleep research, which met when? 1 o'clock, right? Okay. And her professor used to say, look, I don't know anybody who's fallen asleep in my class standing up. So if you're having a hard time, just get up and I welcome you too. If you're having a hard time staying with it, just get up, move to the back, move around a little bit. It's hard to fall asleep when you're standing up. Although one of the speakers who I heard at the fall forum in Kansas City pointed out, in making a distinction between the college students who were in the class, discussion, conversation, and the adults, he said, we adults have mastered the ability to fall asleep in these kinds of conferences. We can even do it with our eyes open. We not only can do it with our eyes open, we've mastered it to the degree that we can throw in a few nods. So if I see you nodding too much, I may invite you to get up and, walk around, have a spot in the back there. But we will try to move ahead with this time of the day, and we'll even try to adjust our microphones so that we make that work for you, okay? Part of what you've been hearing about yesterday and what you've been hearing about this morning, part of what we're all about in the schools that you're hearing about is a very, very difficult human process. And I think for any of us to not stop and recognize that is to miss a very key element of what we're about, and that's the process of change. We as human beings are hard-pressed to change. And let me just start by suggesting that all of us in the room are members of this particular group. We are all QWERTYs. Now, don't take offense. I'm a QWERTY also. And we have been for literally centuries. Well, not centuries, decades. Decades, okay? We're all QWERTYs. Anybody know what that is? Jerry, you know because you were at the conference where I first heard this. Yes? Maybe this would help. Are those the home keys? Come on, everybody's using a word processor these days. You've got a laptop or a computer. It's the what? It's the line above what they call the home keys, right? Okay. Let's do a little looking. Let's do a little looking at that particular keyboard. Okay. Look familiar? Okay. You know, the QWERTY is up here. All right. Anybody ever seen this keyboard down here? What are the differences? What are the differences in that keyboard? A little louder. It's reversed. Vowels are all together. Okay. Where are the vowels? Here we are, right? Okay. Over there. What else is different? Numbers at the top. Odd and even distribution of the numbers. Anything else you spot? The QWERTY keyboard, and that's actually what it was known as when it was first developed. And I jotted some of this down. That was first developed in 1867, a few years ago. The top one, keyboard, 1867. Problem was, now this will date me, but I think there are some of you in the audience who will remember when we learned how to type on the manual. Was it the Underwood that you had? And you really had to whack those keys, and they came up, wham, and hit the paper, right? Oh, some nods out there. Thank you very much. Okay. This keyboard originally was not developed like that, the upper one, the QWERTY, because even that was too fast, and the keys kept jamming. I mean, all of you who did that initial stuff, the keys used to jam, and we used to cuss at the typewriter, you know, and we're trying to learn how to do this thing, right? The keys jammed, so what they did was intentionally make it harder. So you couldn't type as fast because the machine mechanically couldn't keep up with your hands, with the human hand, okay? When are we talking? We're talking 1872, when the original design for the keyboard was reconfigured in the one that you see here to make it harder, slower, okay? 1932. Anybody know the name Dvorak? Any musicians or appreciators thereof? Dvorak. Not the same Dvorak, but the same last name. 1932. Dvorak created this keyboard below. Now, let's look at a couple of quick things here. There's the conventional keyboard that you and I have been laboring with, and we labored with maybe this morning or yesterday. What do you notice about the distribution of the amount of time needed on the different kinds, on the two hands, left and right, the fingers, and on the three different main rows of keys? What do you notice about how that keyboard is set up? Where is the greatest percentage required from the two hands? Left hand. Population, primarily right-handed. Slows them down. We're not as fast with the left hand. Okay? What else do you notice about the distribution? The three rows, what do you notice there? Most of them are not in the home row. You got to reach. Slows you down, right? Got to reach. 52% up there in the QWERTY row. Okay? What about the fingers? What do you notice there? what are these index fingers? Is that what we call those, right? Okay. They have the largest percentage. Okay, that kind of follows. That's all right. What happens beyond there? What are we doing with the next finger that would probably be considered smaller percentage than the right hand? 7.2%. This was a machine designed for failure, right? It was designed to slow you down. When was this other option brought into and even marketable? 1932, folks. This keyboard was made available. The Dvorak simplified keyboard. What do you notice different? Greater percentage in the right hand. What about the 3 rows? More in the home rows, home keys. What do you know about the fingers? More even distribution across the fingers in some ways. A little more on the right hand. Why haven't we changed? Because we're no longer using mechanical typewriters, are we? Okay, somebody's going to tell me, yeah, I love my old Underwood, right? No, you're not in it. Yeah, okay. We're using little touch pads. I didn't think I hit that key. Oh, got to go back and erase it, right? Or got a backspace, got to get rid of that. So sensitive, you hardly have to touch the keys on the computer. The computer can keep up faster than most of us can type. Most of us struggled to get, at least when I did my high school personal typing course. Now, I know some of you did that, right? Well, let's take a look at a figure. Less than 70% of the students completing conventional keyboarding classes could type with 40 words a minute in the old system before we went to electronic keyboards. When Dvorak created his, 100% of the students that he trained on the new keyboard could do at least 60 words a minute. Okay? So with this possible, and electric typewriters came in, I mean, I took a little portable electric to college, right? That was back in a little while ago. And now we've got the word processors. So why don't we use this keyboard? Because it's so hard for people to change. Even though Dvorak showed within a few-week training period he could convert people to this other keyboard. There were even companies in the 30s who would reconfigure your typewriter to this keyboard. It was possible in the 30s to change your typewriter. Could they sell that to the public? Could they get people to change? No way. Okay? Even though we could have increased the time, the convenience, we still limp along in 1998 with our conventional QWERTY keyboards on our little computers, right? So it's hard to change. You might say, okay, where's he going with that? What about changing schools? You heard some earlier this morning, and most of you are from schools where you are involved with credits, Carnegie Units. When was that created? For the students in the audience, you should know this, or for the educational professors, you can remind us of this. When did we develop the high school unit of credit? There's extra credit for this if you happen to get it right. We'll give the students the first shot. They're looking at each other. They're pausing. The clock is running. The answer is about how many years ago? Just approximately? About how many years ago? 75? Anybody over here? Could be a winner over here. How about a little over 100 years ago? We'll start with the Committee of 10. And I think some of this is of some relevance to what we're trying to do and worth just a refresher. Who is the Committee of 10 made of? Largely college professors, chaired by Charles Eliot, then president of Harvard. 5 main lines to serve as studies to be pursued in preparation for college entrance. How many students were going on to college after high school graduation in 1893? Fairly small percentage, right? don't know what the actual figure is, but we know it was a fairly small percentage. Well, here I actually put it on there. About 15% of high school graduates actually were going on to college at that time. English, history, mathematics, science, and foreign language. 5 areas of studies. Those are strange 5 areas. I have English, social studies, mathematics, English, foreign. Have you ever heard of these before? I mean, this is revolutionary stuff, right? To have those as our 5 main academic areas. We created them in 1893, and that's when they were actually revolutionary, believe it or not. That was not the conventional college prep curriculum. Latin, Greek, okay. Particularly science, that was very suspect at that day and age. All right. 1893, Committee of 10. Followed up almost 100 years ago by a committee of the NEA called the Committee on College Entrance Examinations. Because why was this being done? It was being done because the colleges across the nation said we want a more uniform standard by which we can know the students who are coming to us from high school. So for those of us who are in the education profession, was this based on sound educational psychology, research into teaching learning strategies and methodologies and how students would learn best in high school? No. The colleges were saying we need to standardize what you high school folks are doing so we know more what kids are coming to colleges with. And how many kids? 15%, more or less. NEA picked it up just a little more than 100 years ago, 1897, and created the Carnegie Unit. Take a look. Who is it made of? They defined the entrance unit, the Carnegie Unit, as 120 hours of instruction per year. Now, we all know that psychologically and through sound educational theory is the exact number of hours that it takes to learn anything, right? You can't learn something in 115. God, you could never learn anything in like 65 or 70 hours. And a lot of you probably wouldn't even begin to consider something other than 120. I mean, that's heresy. We know that 120 is what is written in stone. Interestingly enough, 100 years ago, the committee did say, now you could structure that schedule-wise in several different ways. You could have 40 weeks of 3 periods of 60 minutes each per week, or 4 periods of 45 minutes each per week, or 5 periods of 36 minutes each per week, or what we actually typically have in almost all of the U.S. high schools today, 32 weeks, 5 periods, 45 minutes each week, plus usually about 2 weeks for exams, 2 weeks for exams, 3 to 4 weeks vacation. That's our 40-week school year. So even 100 years ago, when they were putting this together, not on what I would suggest was any kind of sound educational psychological research, but strictly to feed the colleges, even then they said, look, you can use time in different ways. But what have we typically done? We typically have said, no, it's the 5-by-5 schedule. We have not made the change. We're still QWERTYs. We're still QWERTYs. We're still using the old keyboard for the same unfounded reasons. I know there's some folks who are going to have to leave fairly soon for to catch some planes. So I want to kind of jump over to a couple things about the school and what we're doing. And to start that, I'd like to ask, is it Christy? Tracy? Thank you. To show just a little clip of a video. The State Ed Department came in to our school and actually contracted with WNET out of New York City, the Educational Television Channel, to do a video primarily about what we were doing in some of our interdisciplinary math and science and other work in the science areas. but it has a couple of clips that I thought might be interesting to show. So let's roll one for a little bit here, if you would. It's also, the video is available for purchase. Our video teacher wanted me to make sure we say that because the funds go to the video group. And this is called Lessons for Learning. We'll take a few minutes to look at it.
In the heart of Ithaca, New York, a diverse community of rural and urban dwellers in the Finger Lakes region, lies the Alternative Community School. With 260 students in grades 6 through 12, this school has been an advocate for change since it first opened its doors 20 years ago. ACS does not propose to have all the right answers, but certainly knows what questions to pose as it continues to struggle for excellence. Once thought of as strictly experimental, ACS, now a compact partner school, serves as a role model, exploring new ways of teaching and learning.
Well, what we've been working on, particularly in the last 5-6 years, is trying to really rethink what secondary school students need for the future. We're looking at the 21st century. And what would that mean then? What are the kind of skills, knowledge, and attitude that you would need as a graduate from here to really fully participate in what's increasingly a sort of a global neighborhood? And the most important part of that is that everybody who has the key interest in that, most particularly students, staff and parents, the main stakeholders is the language we have it these days, has got to have a major role in the decision making. Our link and our connection with parents is an absolutely critical partnership of trying to make this learning successful for every single youngster. So from day one as an institution, we've been trying to do that in a democratic fashion, shared decision making.
I get support here, the freedom to experiment. I have a huge amount of space to try new things. I have unbelievable resources amongst the staff and the students who give feedback, direct, clear feedback that help me grow.
And it's our school as much as it is Dave's school or Dan's school, and we make the rules. Our vote counts as much as any staff person's vote. And yeah, because it's how we want it and it's how we feel comfortable, it makes us want to take advantage of our education.
All too often educational change or reform we've been expecting, bang, we'll put it in place this year and we're going to have it all together and we'll move on. To have any kind of substantive change, something that really goes to the root of educational practice, it's a much more sustained effort. What are
We're going to stop there. We'll come back to a couple other clips of some other things. I just wanted, since you can't come visit the school today, we'll try to bring the school to you a little bit. Let's put the school in context so you know a bit about our school district, the makeup of the school, and we can come back to some of the things we were just beginning to refer to in the tape. This is a profile of our school district. Bring this over a little bit farther. We're in the heart of the Finger Lakes. Come visit in the summer. Great recreational area. Population about 30,000. With the college students, it's up to about 50,000. So it is a college town with Cornell University and Ithaca College, and then a lot of light industry and small high-tech companies. It's also a rural, suburban, small city district. That sort of covers them all, I think, doesn't it? 155 square mile district, Tompkins County. Dairy farming still predominates. Although the northernmost county in Appalachia, 26%, more or less, that was the current rate of poverty for children and youth in the city, and actually there is a fair amount of poverty, as you would tell from Appalachia, out in some of our rural areas. 8 elementary schools, one of which is also a member of the Coalition of Essential Schools, and you'll hear more about that, and I have a couple of handouts. 2 other middle schools, a central high school, and then plus our alternative middle and high school, which is an essential school. Total of about 6,000 students now in the district, which is described as the most diverse community in New York outside of the 5 cities in New York State. the five major cities, Rochester, Buffalo, New York, Albany, and Yonkers. What's the area outside New York City? We have about 20%, a little more actually this year, of what are called minority, mainly African American, with also Asian, Latin American, 13% special education, 15% Title I, PCEN, pupils with compensatory educational needs, not technically classified learning disabled or emotionally disturbed, but needing some kind of educational support. Typically across the district then about an 80% of students going on to colleges or universities upon graduation. Typical combined SAT scores of about 1,000 or more. Now this is a profile for our school district, but by intent for the last 25 years that we have been in existence, that also is a profile of our school. 260 students, middle school and high school, grades 6 through 12, with about that many currently on a waiting list, so we draw names by lottery, but sub-pools of a lottery to try to maintain some balance across the different grades, male, female, the different racial groups, the special education groups that comprise our population. So we draw from different sub-pools to maintain the diversity that you see in the district. And the same with our graduates. It's anywhere from about 75 to 85% are going on to colleges and universities, and I'll show you some more about that a little later on. SAT scores, again, comparable to what you see here across the main high school and across our district. Students on the Stanford Achievement Test, not the Scholastic Aptitude Test, not the college boards, but the Stanford Achievement Test, which are given 6th grade through 11th through our district. Our students do as well or better than students in the reading comprehension typically, and do about the same as students in mathematics and the computation and the other areas of those standardized tests. So on conventional measures, our students do as well or better than the other students in the main high school or the other two middle schools. We also have mentioned that we are a member school of the Coalition of Essential Schools. And let me say a little bit about that. In 1979, Ted Sizer, who was then at Brown University, was engaged by the NASP, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and the counterpart, the Association of Private Secondary Schools, was commissioned to lead a 5-year study on what's happening at the U.S. high school. And that resulted in three major books. The first was Sizer's own book called Horace's Compromise, The Dilemma of American High School. And as you can see in the subtitle, the first report from a study of high schools. The title, in many ways, speaks to what the book's about. And if any of you education students have not had a chance to read it yet, it should be on your reading list. Professors should put it on your reading list somewhere, because it was an analysis of what was happening in urban, suburban, rural, public, private, parochial high schools across this country from the viewpoint of a teacher, a sort of prototypical Horace, middle-aged, white English teacher. And what he experienced as he interviewed and met with and talked with teachers after teacher across the country was how often this sense of compromise came through. The English teacher who had 5 classes of 30 students, each 150 students, and that meant 150 essays to grade tonight or over the next week, who looked at the current event that just occurred and knew that that hurricane in Honduras affected kids in his classroom whose families were from Honduras. But would he stop and say, let's talk about what's happening in our lives, or let's write about that in some kind of a personal journal entry? No, he makes the compromise. He says, because then I'd have to look at the papers and I've got to read 150. And he found that time and time again across the nation. The compromise. I don't demand as much as I should of my students. I don't have the high expectations. I would like to, but I don't. And that was a tragic statement about what he experienced in writing the first of these 3 books as he went around the country. The second one also says a great deal in its title. The Shopping Mall High School, Winners and Losers in the Educational Marketplace. James Conant, in his book about the high school back in the 50s, talked about and pushed so heavily for the comprehensive high school. We'll offer everything for everybody, and students will take everything they possibly can. But about that thin. It's a veneer. Breadth, yes. Broad coverage, yes. But for what? What do you remember out of that? What do you retain? What can you do with that afterwards? It's a shopping mall. Drop in here, drop in there, dabble in this, dabble in that. And what do we create in that process? Winners and losers. Losers. We create the losers in the conventional U.S. high school. And that's what this 5-year study said in this second book. Third book, Last Little Citadel, the American High Schools since 1940. Robert Hempel undertook to look at sort of the historical development of the high schools in the United States. I wish he'd called it United States high schools, because there are 2 other Americas besides our North America. And we're only part of North America. We have our neighbors in Canada. Essentially, he said, since 1940, the high schools look the same. By and large, yeah, we've rearranged the chairs a bit. We've added maybe a new course here or there. And now in 1990s, if he had written it, he would, we have some more computers. But the 5-by-5 schedule predominates. Yeah, more schools are going to some block scheduling. But what's typically the block schedule for most high schools? Teach the 5 or 6 same courses, but just do them in 2 periods, long, but every other day. It does change some important dynamics in the school, and you better change your style of teaching, because if you're a lecturing teacher and you try to do it for 2 periods straight, you're going to be in deep trouble. So you do have to change some styles of teaching, but there are, of course, teachers who haven't done that even in block scheduling. But the 5-by-5 is still by and large the same. And we looked earlier at the 1897, 5 major areas, 1893, the 5 main topics. What was Arnie talking about this morning? What are required in Maine for high school graduation? Same things, okay? So that's what was the kind of thing found in this 5-year study. And after that, Sizer said, we got to do something about this. And it seems like there are at least 5 major things that are imperative for us to change about the U.S. high school. 1, we need to give room to teachers and students to work and learn in their own appropriate ways. Have you heard that at all this weekend? I think so. 2, insist that students clearly exhibit mastery of their schoolwork. We'll show you some examples here a little later on. I think you've heard some already. Now, that does not necessarily mean that you get 65 on a Regents exam in New York State. That is not mastery. Thank you very much. I don't want my pilot flying a plane getting a 65 on the pilot's test. Thank you very much. I want that pilot to have 110 when he flies my plane. And that's what we expect of pilots, don't we? But we don't expect that. And you know what? The ludicrous thing that now our commissioner of the state of New York has proposed and has been actually approved, because he thinks everybody should take Regents examinations, is that if you're a special education student, you only need to get 55%. So you can miss half of the questions and we'll still pass you. What is this nation coming to? What is this? You can get half of them wrong? Where else as an adult could you get half wrong? Well, maybe in baseball. I guess if you bat 400, that's a damn good average, right? But there are not many places where you can, as an adult, be wrong half the time and maintain your job, right? Get the incentive right for teachers and students and teachers. Focus the students' work on the use of their minds. Keep the structure simple. Keep it flexible. Get the incentives right. For students, getting the kinds of things which they're responsible to demonstrate and to show means something to them. That a graduation, a diploma, completing something in a given part of your program means something to you, means something personally. Incentives for teachers is often around issues of being treated as professionals, as people who hopefully know something and can be given some responsibility for teaching and supported in doing that. The main question that I ask in my school and working with the staff is, how can I help? How can I help? That's the main reason for me taking on the role of principal. So the kind of support that the teacher needs to be creative, to be flexible, to do the kinds of things that are being called for. So from this set of 5 imperatives, Ted Sizer said, I want to develop schools that focus on the essentials. And you heard Arnie say something this morning about focusing on essential questions. That's language that we developed in the coalition. This is the 6-inch spiral notebook of school reform for the coalition. You know how a lot of these reform movements, or you go to the workshop and they give you the huge notebook and this is how you do it, right? No, that's not how you do it if you're part of the coalition, because the coalition recognizes a fundamental difference, and you've heard about it here this morning, you've heard about it this weekend, is our schools and our school districts are fundamentally different from each other. Some of you are saying, well, how could I do that here in Pennsylvania? Or how could I do that in the XYZ school in so-and-so town? Exactly. Exactly. You have to grow it yourself in your own hometown. Arnie can't tell you, well, here, we've got the way to do it from Liberty in Blue Hill, Maine. Y'all down here, just take it on. It'll work in Podunk, Pennsylvania just as well as it did in Blue Hill. No way. He grew that in his community. We grew and we are growing our school in our community. And that's what the coalition said. There are 10 principles that we think can drive major school change, but you've got to figure it out in your own school with your own students, teachers, parents, and in your own community. Each has a unique context. There are copies of this here. Maybe, Tracy, if we want to send some of those around, if folks would like. I didn't quite know how many to prepare. I think we probably got almost enough for everybody. And I'll come back to a couple of these. Why did we get involved in the Coalition of Essential Schools? They began in 1984. We joined in 87. We've been a member for 11 years. So we had already been going for, 12, 13 years when we joined the coalition. 13, 14 years. Why did we join? We joined because one of the students brought an article from a newspaper that was on the front page of our local newspaper that talked about the reform efforts of the Coalition of Essential Schools. And this student put that article up on the bulletin board and was so incensed and says, why are they getting all that attention? We've been doing that stuff for years. And so a group of our students in an English class wrote a letter to Sizer and some of the others and saying, what's this all about? And we've been doing a lot of this stuff for a while. Particularly if you look at something like principle number 4, teaching and learning should be personalized. You heard that this weekend? Certainly. This is a human enterprise we're involved in here in schools, in education, teaching and learning. So we joined because we thought maybe we could share some of what we had been learning in our work in our alternative middle school and high school, as well as join with others who wanted to keep growing, making changes in the public school arena. Now, I'd started and worked with a non-public free school back in the late 60s down in Texas and did that for several years, and then worked with another non-public free school in Columbus, Ohio for several years and got a Ohio organization going of alternative school folks. But I progressively said, why can't we do this in the public school arena? And that's when I came to Ithaca 25 years ago to start this school. And we started small. But we joined the coalition then to get involved in doing some of these kinds of things, some of which we felt would stretch us and take us in new directions, and others which were clear to us. I had one other handout here, Tracy, which you might as well distribute that now also, which is perhaps a little bit of help for some of you who would like to know more about the how the coalition is organized. This is a set of 8 organizational principles that the coalition uses. So we'll just distribute that to you. But let's step back a second and look at another little segment of this particular video that will take you inside the school, again, since we can't be there, and show you some of the things that we're doing in the classroom, doing with students, and some of the kinds of things that we've developed, partly through being involved with the coalition, but partly some things that we had been working on for years anyway. So this will take... District is out of phase with the reality of the life of adolescents and their sleep patterns. We start one of our middle schools and our main high school and our school at 8 o'clock in the morning. The solid sleep research shows that in the early and through late adolescence, there is a phase shift in sleeping patterns driven by a biological clock that's based hormonally and structurally within the neurochemistry of the brain. Clear research to establish that, which says kids are not just lazy and falling asleep in your first period class because they party all night before. Well, we know that some do, but that's not the main thing that's behind it. It's because there's been a phase shift biologically driven. And our secondary schools should be starting at least at 9 o'clock. Our kids did the research, presented that to our school board, even did the research around what would be the impact on the sports schedule, what would be the impact on the buses, and found that we could do it with the same number of buses and probably even cheaper. Has our district changed yet? Well, the board says they're studying it. We'll get back to you. Well, we'll get back to them and we'll see. But that was a sample of an interdisciplinary team project. Can you see what an interdisciplinary team project then can be for these seniors? That's real world stuff. That's high stakes. That's getting the incentive right. That's something that meant something to them. And I love the way they presented it at the school board, because one of the boys on the team said, well, you know, we want to kind of get them with us and we kind of want to soften them up a little bit. So, you know, I think I'll bake some brownies. So I baked a batch of brownies and we started the presentation. He passed around a whole platter of brownies to start the presentation. This year I'm working with 3 teams, interdisciplinary teams. One is researching solid waste and municipal composting in Ithaca and Tompkins County and doing a video which will be shown on our educational television, because the sense is that not much of our community knows about this, and try to increase the awareness and the use of these solid waste systems. Second team is working with a new bike plan, which was just approved by our Common Council, to heighten the awareness of the whole community. They're developing posters to go in storefronts across the community. And even though it was approved by the Common Council, each neighborhood has to take a look at what would be the impact of this particular bike plan on their neighborhood. How's it going to affect parking on my block, right? And so our kids are going out and working with the neighborhoods to educate them to what this bike plan would be like and to try to get them on board. So they've gone to some of the Common Council meetings, they've gone to the bike plan committee meeting, they're starting to go out to interview people, and they're doing a survey among all the secondary schools in our district to get student input on what students think about this bike plan. That's, in a nutshell, what that senior interdisciplinary team of 4 students is doing. And the last one that I'm coaching this semester is looking at Cayuga Lake. Any of you who have an opportunity to come visit our wonderful Finger Lakes recreational area. Cayuga Lake is the longest of the Finger Lakes, the deepest. But at the south end, you can't swim at Stewart Park because it's pretty contaminated. The water's pretty contaminated. And there is a proposal that was just approved for Cornell to put in a lake source cooling plant for their air conditioning on the Cornell campus, which is going to draw water deep in the lake that's cold, run it through conversion system to be the air conditioning unit in Cornell, dumping back then warmer water into the lake. The environmental impact on that is what our students are looking at, and there is we're working with a community agency that's working on perhaps trying to overturn that decision based on the negative impacts this will have on the environment, with an effort to perhaps bring back through some other efforts, things that they're researching, swimming in Stewart Park at the south end of the lake. So that's the other interdisciplinary team project. And you see the final exhibition for that required high school graduation is not a paper that they just turn in to the teacher and gets lost somewhere in that teacher's file. This is real world stuff. You present to the Common Council. You present a tape that's going to be shown in your community, a videotape. The kids are actually working on staging a public forum, a debate on this Cayuga Lake situation that'll be staged at school and video broadcast live from our school. So this is real world stuff. That's the final grade. That's where the final evaluation comes in. We don't use grades, but that's the final evaluation. So I just wanted to give you a couple of quick examples and let you know some of the kinds of work I do, at least first semester, in helping kids with their interdisciplinary team projects. But the other part that you'll see on the other page in your handout is the set of 7 essentials then, as we ask that question, all right, what does the global citizen need in the way of essential skills, knowledge, and attitudes? What does the global citizen need? And we put it in the terms of nouns. A global citizen needs to be a participant in their community and a leader. They need to be communicators, critical thinkers, problem solvers, designers, producers. You see the 7 essentials. And then we took each of those, or at least some of them, and we tried to spell out a little more particularly. For example, in communicators, there are lots of different ways to communicate. Certainly in English, but also in a second language. Use of the computer, use of the language of mathematics, graphic representation. These are high school graduation requirements which our school created, submitted to our school board, submitted to the state education department, and they said, fine, we like it. Show us what the students can do. So there are opportunities, certainly in the state of New York when we created this, to do graduation by exhibition, to do it in a different way, to not do that same credit system that existed some 100 years ago. Let me show you a specific example then of some of the work that we have done in one of those areas, and to get you inside the booklet. And on the students, major types of problems, but then to really investigate them deeply, to engage in real problem solving, real critical thinking. As one of the fifth imperative, using the minds well. Using the minds well. And who are these students in this class? This is heterogeneous, non-tracked. We don't have tracking. All the classes are mixed ability level. These are students who are in essentially their 3rd or 4th year of a science or mathematics course. This is going to be the next one, Tracy, but I want to look at an overhead first. We introduced some of the things in this particular video segment, and we're talking about high school graduation by exhibition. There are books on the table, which maybe people would like a copy of that. And in your folder, there's an article which I wrote, and on the back page of that is the first half of this particular overhead. But also the booklet, it's in on, I think, the third page, right? Somebody look at the third page, am I right? Okay, got it, thank you. Arnie talked this morning about starting the Liberty School by saying, what should students know, be able to do in graduating from high school in moving into the 21st century? That's how we began this work about 8 or 9 years ago, shortly after we had joined the coalition, because the 6th principle of the coalition says, not graduating by credits, over 100 years old system, thank you very much, but graduating by exhibition. What can you actually show me, student, that you can do, that you know? How can you exhibit and demonstrate that? So we simply developed a mission statement that said, our mission, therefore, is to develop global citizens for the 21st century. And notice I said that without looking at the sheet or the overhead. If you can't report and state time and time again your mission statement without looking it up, bag it. Don't even bother with a mission statement. The mission statement ought to mean enough and ought to be simple enough that everybody in the school identifies with it. And we simply came up with the phrase, global citizens for the 21st century, because that's what our young people are being called to do. And we sat down as groups of staff and then groups of students and parents and then brought those together in different ways over about a 2 or 3 year period, asking that tough set of questions. And rather than coming up with, well, I guess what you need to graduate is, 3 credits of English or whatever, these were the things that we said that you needed to do. And we designed work that would have all of our graduates doing an interdisciplinary team project, an individual senior project, and then a graduation portfolio made up of several things, one of which is demonstration of their proficiency in the essential areas. I'll come to those in a second. Arnie mentioned the importance of getting students to work in teams. Anybody who's been into any research laboratory, into any community agency, into any service agency, into any business or industry, anywhere across the country knows what they want most coming out of our high schools and our colleges is young people who can work together on a team. But how often do we really expect, engage, and require students to demonstrate their ability to work in teams? Conventional schools, hardly ever. Hardly ever. And yet that's what the adult world is calling out for us to do. So we put in interdisciplinary senior projects. I teach something every semester, at least one thing each semester. First semester, the last couple of years, I've been teaching, really coaching these teams. Coaching these teams, along with some other teachers who coach them in other areas. I've been particularly working in the area of what we call science and society. Last year, the team, and it was a team wound up of about 6 or 7, we did 2 major bits of teamwork and research. In the first one, they presented to our school board, which was research that showed our school district is out of phase with the reality of the life of adolescents and their sleep patterns. We start one of our middle schools and our main high school and our school at 8 o'clock in the morning. The solid sleep research shows that in the early and through late adolescence, there is a phase shift in sleeping patterns driven by a biological clock that's based hormonally and structurally within the neurochemistry of the brain. Clear research to establish that, which says kids are not just lazy and falling asleep in your first period class because they party all night before. Well, we know that some do, but That's not the main thing that's behind it. It's because there's been a phase shift biologically driven. And our secondary schools should be starting at least at 9 o'clock. Our kids did the research, presented that to our school board, even did the research around what would be the impact on the sports schedule, what would be the impact on the buses, and found that we could do it with the same number of buses and probably even cheaper. Has our district changed yet? Well, the board says they're studying it. We'll get back to you. Well, we'll get back to them and we'll see. But that was a sample of an interdisciplinary team project. Can you see what an interdisciplinary team project then can be for these seniors? That's real world stuff. That's high stakes. That's getting the incentive right. That's something that meant something to them. And I love the way they presented it at the school board, because one of the boys on the team said, well, you know, we want to kind of get them with us, and we kind of want to soften them up a little bit. So, you know, I think I'll bake some brownies. So I baked a batch of brownies, and we started the presentation. He passed around a whole platter of brownies to start the presentation. This year, I'm working with 3 teams, interdisciplinary teams. One is researching solid waste and municipal composting in Ithaca and Tompkins County, and doing a video which will be shown on our educational television, because the sense is that not much of our community knows about this, and try to increase the awareness and the use of these solid waste systems. Second team is working with a new bike plan, which was just approved by our Common Council, to heighten the awareness of the whole community. They're developing posters to go in storefronts across the community. And even though it was approved by the Common Council, each neighborhood has to take a look at what would be the impact of this particular bike plan on their neighborhood. How's it going to affect parking on my block, right? And so our kids are going out and working with the neighborhoods to educate them to what this bike plan would be like, and to try to get them on board. So they've gone to some of the Common Council meetings, they've gone to the bike plan committee meeting, they're starting to go out to interview people, and they're doing a survey among all the secondary schools in our district to get student input on what students think about this bike plan. That's, in a nutshell, what that senior interdisciplinary team of 4 students is doing. And the last one that I'm coaching this semester is looking at Cayuga Lake. Any of you who have an opportunity to come visit our wonderful Finger Lakes recreational area. Cayuga Lake is the longest of the Finger Lakes, the deepest. But at the south end, you can't swim at Stewart Park because it's pretty contaminated. The water's pretty contaminated. And there is a proposal that was just approved for Cornell to put in a lake source cooling plant for their air conditioning on the Cornell campus, which is going to draw water deep in the lake that's cold, run it through conversion system to be the air conditioning unit in Cornell, dumping back then warmer water into the lake. The environmental impact on that is what our students are looking at, and there is working with a community agency that's working on perhaps trying to overturn that decision based on the negative impacts this will have on the environment, with an effort to perhaps bring back, through some other efforts, things that they're researching, swimming in Stewart Park at the south end of the lake. So that's the other interdisciplinary team project. And you see the final exhibition for that required high school graduation is not a paper that they just turn in to the teacher and gets lost somewhere in that teacher's file. This is real world stuff. You present to the Common Council. You present a tape that's going to be shown in your community, a videotape. The kids are actually working on staging a public forum, a debate on this Cayuga Lake situation that'll be staged at school and video broadcast live from our school. So this is real world stuff. That's the final grade. That's where the final evaluation comes in. We don't use grades, but that's the final evaluation. So I just wanted to give you a couple of quick examples and let you know some of the kinds of work I do, at least first semester, in helping kids with their interdisciplinary team projects. But the other part that you'll see on the other page in your handout is the set of 7 essentials then, as we ask that question, all right, what does the global citizen need in the way of essential skills, knowledge, and attitudes? What does the global citizen need? And we put it in the terms of nouns. A global citizen needs to be a participant in their community and a leader. They need to be communicators, critical thinkers, problem solvers, designers, producers. You see the 7 essentials. And then we took each of those, or at least some of them, and we tried to spell out a little more particularly. For example, in communicators, there are lots of different ways to communicate. Certainly in English, but also in a second language. Use of the computer, use of the language of mathematics, graphic representation. These are high school graduation requirements which our school created, submitted to our school board, submitted to the state education department, and they said, fine, we like it. Show us what the students can do. So there are opportunities, certainly in the state of New York when we created this, to do graduation by exhibition, to do it in a different way, to not do that same credit system that existed some 100 years ago. Let me show you a specific example then of some of the work that we have done in one of those areas, and to get you inside the booklet. As you look at the rest of the booklet, it takes each of those 7 essentials and breaks it down into 3 more specifics as to what are the learner outcomes, what are the means of assessment, what are the evaluative criteria. And I know in Pennsylvania, learner outcomes is a dirty word, but we somehow managed to use it. Why? Because we wanted up front with our students to be able to say just what it is that you need to do to graduate. Too often we sort of hold, as teachers, all the cards and we don't let the kids in on the game. We don't let them know what it is that they really have to do to be able to be successful. So we tried to spell it out in considerable detail. This one is related to researchers with a historical and multicultural perspective who understand U.S. history in the process of democratic government. In that particular course, one of the main means of assessment that you can see if you look through that part of the booklet is through a portfolio. I stole this cover sheet from my daughter. One of the other daughters actually graduated from our school. And sometimes I've heard it said that that's a real test of whether you believe in your school if your own kids go there. That's certainly been the case for myself. This is what would be in that portfolio for that particular essential. That's one of the means of evaluating the student. Not on Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock on June 23rd, sitting down in the gymnasium and filling out a Regents examination. A one-shot, small snapshot on one day of what the student knows about U.S. history and government and can demonstrate and do in the area of history and government. But a portfolio of work over a full year of time, showing many different pieces of analytical literature, of taking perspectives of other people, all the kind of pieces that go to making a full portfolio, what we call a performance-based assessment system. A performance-based assessment system, not a one-shot test at the end of a course, which will mean nothing in the long run. If you look at the other part of that particular essential, it talks about global citizen, multicultural citizen. And I want to give you one other example of what we do as a final exhibition. And this will be in the little couple of video clips. At the end of a first semester course called Facing History, students do this particular final exhibition. This is, if you will, their kind of exam. It lasts 3 days, double period, total of about 5 hours. It's the end of the first semester. It's their first major exhibition in their work in the area of global studies and multiculturalism. Let's just take a look at the first few minutes of that, if we could, Tracy.
Hello, my name is Bronwyn Exter, and I'm here as a member of the Alternative Community Schools class studying the Middle East. Each student here has taken on a role of a figure representing a nation or group involved in the Middle East conflict, specifically in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and has done 2 extensive research papers, first on the history of their involvement in that region, and second, on their perspective of the Arab-Israeli conflict. What you are about to see is a simulation of an international conference on the Middle East. Each delegation represented here will give an opening statement, will participate in debates, caucuses, make and vote on proposals, and at the conclusion of the conference will give a final statement. Throughout the conference, each character will not step out of his or her role. We would like to acknowledge now that this is an unrealistic situation, for logistically very few of these delegations would actually agree to be sitting in the same room with certain others. Now to introduce our delegates. I will be representing Boutros Boutros-Ghali of Egypt, the current Secretary General of the United Nations. To my left.
So you see what the basic, no, leave it off for a second. I'm going to show another little peek. So you see the basic design of this, we can leave the lights off. We're going to show another clip here in a sec, is to have this simulated Middle East peace conference. I hope you caught that they've done 2 research papers before this. One was on the particular country that they're representing at the table. One was on the particular person or the political party that they might be representing at the table. And some of these you'll notice are in pairs. And then they do this presenting positions, engaging in debate, having a summing up, and trying to come to some possible resolutions. The next video is just a clip of the kind of dialogue that these kids get into.
It was an attack against Syria, Jordan, and Egypt.
They were just defending themselves against clear aggression from you, Egypt,
We were cut off economically.
and Jordan.
PLO.
Okay, how do you justify 1948 Jewish guerrillas massacred hundreds of Arabs in the village of Deir Yassin? How do you justify October 1st, 1985, 8 Israeli jets bombed PLO headquarters in Tunis, 38 killed, 100 injured? How do you justify in 1980 the Jewish underground planted bombs in cars and 2 mayors in the West Bank were killed? How do you justify in 1983 disguised Jewish terrorists entered Islamic College of Hebron campus and opened fire and threw hand grenades? How do you justify in 1960 Israeli hijacked Lebanese plane? How do you justify in 1963 Muslim sections of towns were bulldozed by Israeli people forced to flee in their homes? How do you justify Israeli people moving into the little land that you've given us in the West Bank and taking it over and not giving us any place to live, not even under occupation?
Not even the slums and the refugee camps.
The terrorist actions they're talking about were not done by who we represent now.
But you say, okay, that we cannot control all our fractions. We have no country, we have no police, we have no army, we have nothing. And you have an army backed by the largest superpower in the world. And you cannot control your people?
And you condemn us for not being able to control terrorist
For all
acts?
those military attacks?
They were terrorist attacks, just as they are terrorist attacks upon you.
Again, these were isolated events in the
Well,
past.
our
which
events
we-
are isolated
They are
events.
continuous events, and they're all...
I think you can see that this is the kind of final exam that you won't easily forget. Turn the lights again. Actually exhibiting, getting engaged, engaging their minds, their thinking from the research that they've done in a way to demonstrate what they've learned is such a powerful part of what our kids' experience is all about. Let's go back for a minute. To the other part about our essentials, that I wanted to show you one other part of that. We talked about community participants and leaders. And some of you were asking about how Arnie might evaluate their learners and some of the kinds of things which they're expecting kids to be able to do. And you might say, well, how do you evaluate kids for being community participants and leaders? Well, they're required to do community service, just as Arnie's trying to do with his school. And again, that was voted on by the students, similar to what he was saying. They voted that in, and they do at least 30 hours, and some of our students do 100 or more. It's not uncommon for them to do much more than that, but that's a minimum that they voted in. So that's one way that they demonstrate their participation in the community, and sometimes even their leadership in that. And we get calls all the time from our community for people to who want us to come in and help with some project or to do some service. Giving back to the school and the community is something which they've taken. Another part of that is career exploration. What do kids and how do they ever find out what it is to do out there in the adult world? We have 5 different community studies programs where we have kids beginning even in our middle school, starting to explore different things in the world of work, career opportunities. What's it like to work in a radio station? What's it like to work in a restaurant? What's it like, one youngster going to a vet and working in a veterinarian's office, came back after their initial 9-week exploration as a 7th grader and said, I don't think I do very well with blood. I don't know whether I'll go into veterinary medicine. Nice thing to learn as a 7th grader rather than in the 3rd year of your graduate program in veterinary medicine, right? So the opportunity to look into and explore different careers. And let's just look at one other quick example of how we do that in using the community. And this is Molly, the student you saw in the tape in the beginning here. This is only about 2 minutes, the last one.
A community academic placement, or CAP, is to get students from this school involved in the community, and one bonus is that you get academic credit for it. There are CAPs everywhere. People had CAPs at the SPCA, the local SPCA, or at any place in the community that you're interested in that warrants academic credit.
I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
It was my junior year, and I had finished biology, and there wasn't much more science that I could. I had done most of the science that I could because I took so many science classes each year. And I talked to Dan and said that I was interested in working somewhere in the community in the scientific field, and I said I was interested in genetics. And so Dan got in touch with people at Cornell who were genetics professors or worked in that field, and they put him in touch finally with Suzanne Lipari, and she agreed, and I started work with her 3 hours a day, twice a week.
Hi, Molly. How are you? Good. How's it going? Good. Well, I guess today you need to look at your DNA, and you've loaded gels before.
In the lab that I worked at, we were looking at a fungus that attacks chestnut trees and trying to figure out how we could stop this fungus, and a lot of work with the fungal DNA and analyzing the fungal DNA to find out who its mother was and who its father was and stuff like that. My part was initially picking the spores all the way to the end where I took a picture of the DNA, which took me the whole year. A CAP really puts you in the real situation, so it gives you hands-on experience for what you're really interested in and lets you see if that's something you'd like to do once you're out of high school or college or graduate school or whatever.
Okay, I think that gives you an example of what we mean by community studies. That one, again, her junior year. We also have a bus and there was public transportation. She happened to have a car, that her parents' car that she could borrow on the 2 days she needed to go to the community placement or the community academic placement. And that one was in a lab at Cornell. We're in a university town. But there are just dozens of them out there, whether they're just beginning career exploration, seeing what it's like for a middle schooler, or something as extensive as Molly did, twice a week, 3 hours a day. She just graduated from Smith last year, by the way. But our community work often extends much beyond that. That's just the local Ithaca community. And there's a bit in the article that's in your brochure also about our spring trips. We take a whole week in the spring, usually the last week in May or the first week in June, where school is closed. School is out as far as in the building, because we're out everywhere. We began when we were just small with the junior high of about 65, and we continue to grow to the point where we could no longer do one trip. We do now at least a dozen or so trips. And students will work, some of them all year, to raise the money to go on a French exchange trip to Paris or to go on a Spanish exchange trip to Mexico. They'll work all year in our kitchen, serving, preparing food, breakfast, and lunch to earn the money to go to a marine ecology spring trip in the Virgin Islands. Or they'll go on a bicycle trip, and I do too. At the age of 50, my 6 kids gave me a mountain bike. So I rose to the occasion and decided to be one of the staff who would go with the cross-country bicycle touring group. Now what this means is you carry about 50 pounds of gear on your bike, and you bike for anywhere from 6 to 10 hours a day, till you think, if I could ever turn these pedals one more time, it would be an absolute miracle. And then you get to the campground, and of course you have to set up tents. You have to cook your meals, right? And we did that. I did that 3 different years, working with our bike group. That's a cross-country bicycle. That's one of the other spring trips. Or a canoe group, or a hiking group. So they're not all these way out in foreign countries. Some have been a city group, going to visit. And it's surprising every year how many kids in Ithaca, New York have never been out of their own hometown. So going on a city trip, or going camping someplace else. Learning doesn't happen just in the 4 walls of the school. It happens out in our community, in Ithaca. It happens around the whole country, around the world. We try to make the whole place the classroom. Take kids out to all these kind of opportunities, because that's where learning can really go on. Just time for 1 or 2 last things to close here. Some would ask about what evidence do you have that kids are successful, and some people look at things like getting into colleges or universities. That's a partial list, just a partial list of the colleges and universities that are, what do we have now, 17, 18 years of graduates? I've lost track. And what is in the transcript, some of you will ask. No letter grades, therefore no grade point average, therefore no class rank. And we write right on those parts of the application, we do not give these, see our school profile. Written descriptive evaluations of the work that the student have done, selected by the student and our registrar secretary, sometimes a guidance counselor. An overview of their whole graduation by exhibition, listing all the things they've done, including their community service, including their interdisciplinary team project, including their independent senior project, including a list of the CAPS or the community career studies that they did, including a resume which they wrote themselves in senior seminar. So it's a mini portfolio, if you will, that we send to the colleges and universities. And just as Arnie was saying, by and large across the country, these are the schools that our kids are getting into, 75 to 85% of them. And you say, well, what about the others? They often go within a year or 2. Sometimes they travel, work for some other kind of community service or an agency, or work to earn enough money to go to college before they return. But almost all of them at some point or another return. So that's just one of those kind of measures of success. I think we're about out of time, and there are a couple other things I could show, but I think maybe we should stop here and try to answer some questions that you may have. Again, public, middle school, and high school, 25th year, graduation by exhibition, personalizing education. It's been an exciting, fun trip. Questions? You want to take the tape?
At the beginning, you made a comment about you wanted a pilot to be 100% proficient, and the regions or the legislators or government agencies said that a special ed student could only have to be 55% efficient. What are you going to measure them as 110 proficient? Are you going to say they will be able to drive or fly the plane? Where are we going? Right. What is your interpretation of that?
Right. You see in our list where it says they must demonstrate proficiency in all of the essentials, all 7 essentials. So what is proficiency? For us, that's comparable to what people talk about as mastery, 85% or better if you were talking in conventional terms. So all of our students are demonstrating that level in each of these areas. Some people would call it equivalent to a B. What does that mean if you don't do that in your first round? For example, in this Middle East presentation or in that U.S. history portfolio, what if there are some parts of that portfolio which aren't up to that standard of proficiency? You don't fail, you just have not yet demonstrated proficiency, and you continue to work on it. And we create in the schedule places for students to continue portfolio completion work until you can complete that part of that U.S. history portfolio, until you can demonstrate that level of proficiency.
My question I'm trying to get at is that there are some students that just don't have that ability, or do they all, in your opinion? For example, a special ed student or an LD student that has the proficiency that you would think to be a pilot. So you're going to work with that student until they get proficient to fly that plane.
There are some special education students who have severe learning disabilities for whom there would be a special education diploma given. It looks exactly like the other diploma, but it does have a line that says demonstrated through their own individualized plan for graduation. For example, for the last 2 years running, we have had 2 different students with Down syndrome graduate. Clearly they physically, biologically, neurologically are limited. Therefore, we defined and redefined the target goals for those 2 young ladies to demonstrate proficiency appropriate to their particular needs. And there were no 2 prouder girls at graduation.
Well, in essence, you're saying the same thing what the legislators are saying. Maybe they use 55%, but the terminology might be a little different. They're saying that special ed students should have a different.
Except they're talking about all special ed students, and I'm giving you the rare exception because I can talk about the rest of our special ed students who graduated with a full diploma and demonstrate proficiency in all of those areas and all the essentials, partly because we also work with them with different modalities. If you're a student who has a writing disability, we're not going to necessarily use that as the sole means by which we're going to evaluate what you've learned in a particular essential area. It could be that you would do something more through an oral presentation, through video work that you would have done, through a photo essay that can demonstrate just as high quality work, but would not have you required to demonstrate it through the area of deficiency that you've been struggling with, which might be writing. So we use a variety of ways that students can demonstrate that at a proficient level, and that's different than what the state ed folks are talking about. Other questions?
The Norman Vincent Peale organization, called Positive Kids, said that self-esteem is a key factor in drug and alcohol abuse. Now, your program, it seems like it would certainly enhance self-esteem and confidence. How does this impact drug and alcohol abuse in your school?
Certainly we work on self-esteem. That's a big part. We could have talked some more about our family groups. It's somewhat like you heard that from School Within a School, which has, and Arnie was talking about advisory. We meet in family groups Monday and Friday for a full period of about 45 minutes. Small group, about 10 to 15 with a teacher serving as teacher counselor advisor, and a lot of very important things happen in what we call family group. As far as substance abuse in our students, we live in a college town. Substances to be abused are rampant in most college towns across the nation. Our students are just as susceptible and caught up in that possibility in their lives as you would imagine. I don't have any hard data, but I think I could show you that anecdotally, most years, and we've been around 25 years, the overwhelming majority of students will say one of two things. One, that's not cool to do at our school or anywhere related to any school event, because they have that much ownership of the school. Secondly, for example, with students who smoke cigarettes, they will, overwhelming majority, we probably have less than 10% this year who smoke cigarettes. And of course they don't do that on school grounds. But the pervasive attitude among students is that you don't have to be involved with those substances of abuse. I think year in, year out you would find that. We do have a drugs committee of students who work on that as a way to help and work with students who are struggling with substance abuse. I'd like to think that a fair amount of what we do certainly helps in that area.
Thank you.
One last question, anyone else? There are two things out there on the table if you want to. One is the Public Schools at Work. It's a collection of work. We have an extensive chapter in there, and there is this video which you've seen, which also is available if you are interested in purchasing those. And we have one last question here.
Actually, not a question, a comment just about how important these connections are. One of my beloved teachers was Dave's student, Troy, who's now a teacher in an alternative school. And she says that, if you want accountability, what Troy says is this should be every child's birthright. And that from a woman of 28 who's a phenomenal woman, I think is the best accountability.
Thank you. And thank you.